When you develop CFS or fibro, you may have felt like you entered a new world, one in which all the rules of life had changed and there was no obvious way forward. But there are many things you can do to regain control and improve your well-being. Using the ideas you'll find in these videos, you can learn how to manage CFS or fibro. In this and the next several videos, we'll take the first step by focusing on some important ideas for understanding your situation. We'll begin by looking at three key aspects of CFS and fibro. The first deals with CFS and fibro as long-term conditions. Long-term conditions. Perhaps when you first became ill with CFS or fibro, you thought you had a short-term illness, but one that kept hanging on. At some point, however, you realized that you had entered a new realm. You were confronted by the fact that your problem was something quite different. Short-term or acute illnesses are temporary problems that usually end because of medical treatment or the passage of time. CFS and fibro do not create a temporary interruption of your life. Rather, they are conditions that persist. Instead of resuming your previous life after a brief interruption, you were faced with having to adjust to long-term symptoms and limitations. And if you are like many people with CFS and fibro, your condition became a focus around which much of your life was oriented. You may also have found that the strategies you use for acute illness, such as pushing through in spite of symptoms, only makes things worse. In these videos, you will learn skills for managing a different kind of illness. Second is comprehensive effects. Not only do CFS and fibro impose limits and bring symptoms that persist, they have comprehensive effects touching many parts of life. They affect your ability to work, your relationships, your moods, your hopes and dreams for the future, and even your sense of who you are. To live successfully with CFS or fibro, you have to do much more than just manage symptoms. You have to address their effects on your emotions, your relationships, your finances, and your view of yourself and your place in the world. Complicating the challenge, there is an interaction between CFS and fibro and other parts of your life. Let me show you how to do that, or how that is done, in the second slide. For example, CFS and fibro reduce your activity level. That's symbolized by the arrow going from CFS FM up to activity. But if you try to do more than your body can tolerate, you will experience higher symptoms. That's activity can have an effect on CFS FM. The solution is pacing. The same pattern of reciprocal effects is true for stress. Living with symptoms on a daily basis is inherently stressful. In addition, illness often creates financial pressures, complicates relationships, and brings great uncertainty about the future. In all these ways, illness increases stress. But stress, in turn, makes symptoms worse. In fact, it's one of the worst symptom intensifiers for people with CFS and fibro, making stress management an important part of your self-management program. Another example is the interaction between illness and feelings. Emotions like worry, anger, depression, and grief are normal and understandable reactions to the disruptions, losses, and uncertainty brought by serious illness. Emotions, in turn, can intensify symptoms. For example, people who are depressed have a lower threshold for pain, so this makes addressing feelings an important part of your management program. There are similar two-way interactions between illness and relationships. When long-term illness is present, relationships often suffer because the person who is ill feels discomfort and has less energy, and because others have their lives disrupted too. Relationship problems create new stresses that in turn make symptoms worse. Illness affects finances by reducing income, and then financial worries increase stress, which translates into higher symptoms. To summarize, CFS and fibro have comprehensive effects touching many parts of life. They are much more than simple medical problems. and so a plan for managing them has to address all of their effects, not just symptoms. Third, and perhaps most important, chronic fatigue syndrome and fibro are affected by how you respond to them. In fact, how you live your life with CFS or fibro may well have a larger effect on your condition than the medical treatments you get. Let me explain with a personal example. Earlier in my life, I had cancer, which was treated with surgery and radiation. The treatment was successful, and I recovered. But the outcome was determined by the battle between the cancer and my doctors. My role was passive. I felt like a bystander to my illness. I discovered that the situation with CFS is quite different. I remember how I learned that. For some time after getting sick, I experienced puzzling fluctuations in my symptoms. Some days my fatigue and pain were strong, but on other days they lessened. I couldn't see why until I came across the concept of push and crash, which explained that the waxing and waning of symptoms were the result of how I responded to my symptoms. When my symptoms were intense, I went to bed to recover. When my symptoms declined, I resumed my usual activity level, but because of the limits imposed by CFS, I increased my symptoms again, perpetuating the cycle of push and crash. Initially, I felt devastated by the realization that I'd been causing much of my own suffering. But then I told myself there's hope. If living one way increases my symptoms, then maybe living differently can give me a way to regain control. Using pacing and other strategies, I replaced push and crash with a more stable and predictable life, and over a period of 4 years recovered back to my pre-CFS level of health. The upcoming videos contain many ideas for things you can do to feel better. These strategies can help reduce pain and discomfort, bring greater stability, and lessen suffering. I don't promise you recovery, but the strategies you'll hear have produced improvement for many people we have known in our self-help program.